TNT Radio.
Yes, we just keep hammering out the content here on TNT. No lightweights in the house today. I'm really happy to be joined for the first time, and who knows, maybe first of many visits here to Locked and Loaded by the one and only Paul Bogey, not Buggy. I was describing him as Buggy earlier on, and I like my guests to keep me right. And I said, "How do you pronounce that name of yours?" And he stuck his finger up his nose, and I think that was indicating that's his gesture, by the way, and not mine. It's Buggy or Boogie. How you doing this morning, Paul?
Yeah, good morning, Rick. Yeah, I always say to people with the pronunciation of my surname, just think up your nose.
It looks like it's written though, B-O-G-G-I, Buggy. I would have said Buggy, but no, it's Boogie. And listen, we've started off with a laugh this morning, and I don't know, well, I do know about you, I know a little bit about you anyway. You're very much a big advocate in mental health awareness and trying to help people out that are getting it tight at the minute. And I think, Paul, if we don't have a little bit of humor and we can't laugh at least once a day, we're on a hiding to nothing. We need to have some kind of sense of humor to try and navigate through all the madness that's going on in the world right now. So no disrespect about your name, but I was making light because I try and laugh as much as I can during this show. Otherwise it would be just too overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I say think up your nose, I remember being a trainee guardsman in the first week of basic training, and we had a 10 p.m. show parade, and the officers came along, and I said, trainee guardsman, gave them a number, and they said, trainee guardsman who? I said, Bogey, sir, as in up your nose, sir. And it didn't go too well. It didn't go too well at all. So, yeah.
Well, it's obviously something that's stuck in your mind. So it is just for people, Paul, that maybe aren't aware of who you are. Paul is a former Buckingham Palace Scots Guard, and he's also an author. He's written a book called From Heroin to Hero that chronicles his struggle and overcoming addiction and homelessness. So I've got a little review here of your book, Paul. So I'm just going by what was written here. So Paul, yourself, you battled heroin addiction for 7 years. Then you turned your life around to become Queen's Guard, one of the world's toughest army regiments. And following leaving the army, Paul, yourself spreads insights into addiction, determination, and lessons learned. How important is it to be doing that, my friend? Because I believe the government have very much let down our youth, people that are suffering from mental health issues, and particularly ex-service members. A lot of guys I know personally who were in the forces that are dealing with terrible PTSD right now have been really failed by the government. There are some independent groups together, ex-veterans getting together to help each other out. But I think the government has in general failed people when it comes to mental health here in the UK and Ireland.
Yeah, definitely. The truth of the matter is, Rick, these charities and organisations, people like myself, shouldn't be needed. I volunteer to visit prisons, I go into schools, I go into football clubs, I go into charities and do my motivational speaking without any funding. And I've asked the government for funding to help me, but I use my personal money to do those things. The same with the charities with regards to homelessness and mental health. These things should not be needed. Period. We shouldn't have homeless people, certainly not homeless veterans, dying on our streets year after year. And it's pretty disgusting, if truth be told.
It is, and you mentioned there about going into prisons. I've done a little bit of prison work myself, a little bit in Northern Ireland, a little bit overseas as well, trying to go in and because if you're in that position and you're in a prison, it's not a good environment to be in. Usually it makes mental health issues and criminality worse as a result of being there. So when somebody gets released from a prison, unless they have something that they can positively put their life in towards, generally speaking, they're on a downward spiral. Okay, so you mentioned that you do a little bit of prison work, but also you mentioned schools. Okay, you're going into schools as well. So that's something that I want to ask you about, because there seems to be a rising crisis of mental health among our nation's children, especially following the lockdowns over the, between 2020 right the way up to 2022, when all the schools were closed and kids were isolated from each other. There was a huge amounts of mental health distress inflicted upon children, and that's never been addressed. So when you're going into schools, are you going in on the angle of mental health awareness and or drug awareness as well, or what would be your strategy when you're going into schools? What message are you trying to get across first and foremost?
So initially, when the schools reached out, I thought prevention is better than cure.
Mm-hmm.
With regards to drug addiction, which is mostly what I speak about, which obviously has mental health parts to do with it. So when I went in, I was thinking prevention is better than cure. I spoke to the teachers and they told me, to my horror, that they have many kids who are already smoking cannabis, drinking every evening, taking ecstasy, taking other tablets. And so these kids that are in school now are already dabbling and experimenting with drugs. Some are becoming addicted to drugs, and that's crazy. The fact that we've got school kids addicted to drugs now. So when I go in and do my talks, I'm aware of that fact when I start talking. I'm not going to single any kids out, but I just put general information out there for them. I'm not asking anyone to put their hand up and admit to being on drugs or using drugs, but if I put enough information out there about the dangers of drugs, the dangers of even trying certain drugs for the first time, you've got the potential to become addicted. A lot of these kids won't even know if they've got an addictive personality or not. They're unaware because they're still young. But unfortunately, many of them are trying drugs through peer pressure, boredom, anger, anxiety. They try drugs for whatever reason, and a continuation of taking these drugs results in an addiction. And that's a scary thought, to think that so many are struggling.
Well, do you know what I want to do? We're going to take a little headline break now, just for 30 seconds. When we come back at the other side of that, I want to try and, I'm thinking, just as you're talking, I'm thinking about my own experiences when I went to secondary school between 1985 and 1992, okay, in Northern Ireland. So, growing up it wasn't a, great area. We had our struggles, we had our problems, but we never had any levels of drug use or drug abuse. And it was a big school I went to. There was about 1,200 kids went to that school of all ages, between 13 and 18 years of age. So I'm thinking to myself, well, what the hell's happened in the last 20 to 25 years that it's going from, in my experience, almost nobody was doing drugs back then. They would have drank, maybe smoked, and maybe done a little bit of this and that, but there was no hard drug use the way like ecstasy or heroin or cocaine or anything like that. So what has happened in our society that you're now experiencing this to your horror when you're going into these schools right across the UK? So think about that one, and I'll get your answer when we come back at the other side here on TNT, today's News Talk.
I got news for you.
TNT Radio News.
It's about
For TNT,
time.
this is James O'Neill. 3 sons of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh were killed in an Israeli airstrike in the Gaza Strip, according to both the Palestinian group and Haniyeh's family. Netball Australia has decided not to implement a ban on transgender players in their elite domestic competitions, diverging from World Netball's recent decision to exclude transgender athletes from international matches. For the second consecutive year, over a quarter of the UK's overseas aid budget has been allocated to supporting asylum seekers and refugees within the country, according to the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office.
We're the pinup boys and poster girls for free speech. We just don't look as impressive as Vladimir Putin shirtless on a horse. Yeah, 24/7, 365. We never stop sifting fact from fiction, misinformation from the truth, from government overreach to the latest on mandates, big tech censorship to propaganda gone mad. Listen to TNT Radio and get the news and views direct from our expert presenters and commentators anywhere you go. Ask Alexa or Google to play TNT Radio or download the TNT Radio app for free from the App Store or Google Play. Today's News Talk. This is TNT Radio.
Okay, talking live, uncensored and unscripted this morning with Paul Bogey, who's the author of From Heroine to Hero. Paul, you're talking about going into schools. You're shocked and horrified whenever you're told there's a lot of kids are dabbling in ecstasy or dabbling in harder drugs. Back in the day, I don't know what age you are, but when I was at school, back in the mid-'80s to the early 90s, the odd person might have took drugs. To me, the school rebel was somebody that smoked in the playground, and then at the weekend you would have went out and got a carry-out, got an adult to buy you some grog from the local off license. That was about as far as it went, and that was in a pretty big school back then, in a not particularly great area. So what's happened? What's happened these days that more and more drugs are found, more and more kids are finding their way going down the drug route?
So it's my opinion that the unfortunate circumstances is that there are a lot of drugs on the streets, and these drugs are going to find their way into schools. There are drug dealers that hang about outside schools in the UK, to sell drugs to kids. And the unfortunate thing, and this is a harsh, brutal reality that society does not want to acknowledge, is that these mind-altering drugs, so your cannabis, your ecstasy, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, they offer the user, whether you're 12 years old or 52 years old, they offer the user an escape of reality. So for many of these kids at the moment suffering with mental health issues, suffering with childhood trauma, suffering with boredom, loneliness, anger, or sadness, or whatever it is that's going on in their life, when they take a drug that offers them an escape, they love the feeling. This is the harsh reality. They love the feeling, and they want to take those drugs again for a second time and a third time. And like I said earlier, a continuation of some of those drugs, all of those drugs actually, will result in an addiction problem. So it's irrelevant what the reasons are for the kids taking the drugs. Peer pressure is another great one. Whatever the reason is that the kids take them, the truth of the matter is when the kids do take them, it feels nice to a human being when you take these drugs for the first time. That's a harsh reality. And this is something that I'm often told not to really talk about, even though it's true, to not vocalize it so much. But I'm not one for sitting on my hands. I speak the truth, and that's the truth. The drugs feel nice, even to those kids, especially to those kids, and they want to go back.
And here's the thing, but they have to feel nice, because if there were a horrible experience, or, it's like, if it tasted disgusting, or you had an awful reaction to a drug the very first time that you ever took it, then you would never go back to it again. So it has to have that sweetness to it to allure people, to suck people in, to make it seem attractive, but it doesn't stay sweet for long. It soon loses the sweetness, and then it becomes a poison that's in your system once it's got its hooks in you. And interesting, you mentioned there about escapism. A lot of people retreat into addictions to escape from reality, or they don't want to deal with everyday life for whatever reason. And I understand that. It can be a shopping addiction, it could be a computer game addiction, a gambling addiction, a drug addiction, alcohol addiction. It could be any amount of things, any type of self-abuse there. So the question again is, why are so many people being driven to escape from reality at this time? I think there's the internet and the online activities of kids these days is responsible for a lot of mental health issues, responsible for people maybe turning to drugs to escape from this fake virtual online world they inhabit. And in your case, just as we're up this up, Paul, you found an outlet after you overcame your addiction with heroin, you put that energy and that effort of yours into the military. And I think if you don't have something to put your efforts and energy into when you've kicked an addiction, it maybe is harder to stay off drugs if you've nothing to focus your life on, something real and something meaningful. And I think that's what's missing with a lot of kids these days too. They don't have any direction, or they don't have any definite path that they want to follow in their life. So they're just lurching from one day to the next.
Yeah, what you have to do is you have to fill that void.
Yeah.
That huge void has to be filled. And for me, heroin was a crutch. It was my best friend. So if I am choosing to take heroin out of my life, my go-to place, my go-to feeling, that has to be replaced with something. Otherwise, the temptation and the likelihood of relapse is going to happen because I have not put anything else in its place. So for me, it was the fitness, the boxing, the weightlifting, the running, cycling, all these things, which turned me out to be an incredibly fit man, able enough to go and join the military. So that's where I focus my energy. But, you know, not everybody wants to join the army, but we have to find something, something after addiction and recovery to sink our teeth into, something that we love and enjoy to occupy the mind, to steer us away from the drugs.
And support's very important as well, because I have a few friends that are, you know, have been in the same kind of situation as you have, and they've overcome addictions, they've turned their lives around, and now they're doing very well, but they haven't been able to do that alone. As much as guys think they're tough and I can do this alone and I'm able, yeah, you are to be able to take those steps, but support networks, I think, are very, very important as well, because you will have your bad days. You maybe have days where you feel like you're going to relapse, or days when you just want to throw the towel. And again, life can get back on top of you again. And it's important in that respect to have some support networks there. Paul, we've got to stop right now, but I want to direct people your way. You have an X or Twitter page at Heroin to Hero. That's your X page. And you also have a website, Paul Bogie, and that's spelled Boggie. I'm not going to forget that one, .co.uk. People can reach out to you, contact you there, and maybe if someone does reach out, maybe you're aware of support services in people's areas, you can steer them the right direction. So I've tried to squeeze as much as I can in here in the time that we have, and I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your day today to come on here and talk about this very important topic on TNT. So big salute to you, my friend. I wish you nothing but the best, and we'll stay in touch and maybe get an update from you sooner rather than later. So thank you so much, Paul. I've got to